Hi everyone, it's TF.
It's the free one.
We're all here. It's Milo, Hussein, Alice, and Riley. We are back.
And me, James Acaster.
Yes, that's right. We're all back from taking several weeks off, and what weeks they were to take off.
What weeks they were? Let me tell you, when I'm taking off a week, I'm ready to
work
take
ahead,
off.
right? We'll have a bit of a backlog, and nothing's going to happen.
We got back to the studio and we found that James Acaster was sleeping on our sofa, and we asked James Acaster, why are you sleeping on our sofa? And he told us the story about how he got cucked by Mr. Bean. I may have got like the timelines wrong on that, but I think that's generally
Mr. Bean. Mr. Bean cucked James Acaster, and then the Queen was so shocked by this news that she fucking died.
Yeah. And then James's mum kicked him out because he did Quaaludes on the day that the Queen died. It was all terrible.
Enough about good friend of the show, definitely person who's ending the joke, James Acaster. I want to introduce
definitely not someone who is being
this
sent this by his friends every time this happens, and is just sort of looking at his phone screen like, fuck.
I want to introduce our guest, a returning champion, a true favorite of ours to talk to whenever the topic turns to comparative history or indeed much else. It's Patrick Wyman of the Tides of History.
Hey, it's going fantastic.
Patrick,
thank you for having me.
Patrick Wyman coming at you live from the mists of time.
Yeah, that's right. Patrick Wyman, who is currently, from your perspective, in the past, where he talks about
time is relative. Look, like I have no idea whether it's the Bronze Age, could be the Iron Age. Some places, like we may be dealing with a Paleolithic situation. I honestly don't know. Like that's. Ever since they legalized weed in Arizona, much has been unclear to me.
I'd like to top Alice's joke with Pastrick Wen man.
Pastrick Wen. That's right. It's
Pastrick Wyman is like specifically historiography as opposed to history.
He's a teleological historian.
So. I have a couple of things to talk about at the top of the episode, but ultimately what I'd like to get into sort of as we go on is with the development of, let's say, things as they have been going in the UK especially, but the UK and the US I think more broadly, mostly the UK.
They've been pretty chill.
Apart from all the grieving we've been doing, obviously.
I've been increasingly interested in the idea of rapid collapses in the legitimacy of whether it's governments, ruling paradigms, whatever, we can kind of put them around this paradigm of a sudden and unexpected collapse when some ruling idea, person, people stops
It's
doing
very
the
funny
thing
that for Britain to open the door to the unexpected sudden collapse in state legitimacy room and find Iran in there as well, having got in by another door.
But before we get there, I want to revisit a couple of old friends. We all remember Shamath Palihapitiya, the king
We remember
of SPACs.
SPAC very fondly.
Yeah.
Sorry, King of SPACs is something a school bully calls you when you're in year 10.
So a couple of these we've talked about, such as Open Door and Clover Health. Others we haven't, like Virgin Galactic. Or
Virgin Galactic, also something a school bully calls you.
Yeah. As well as SoFi. Anything for that for school bullies? Or
no,
that's
a mulligan. Come back to me on the next one. I have a checklist here. I have two major bits that I want to get into this episode, so I'll let you know when I tick them off here.
Yeah.
So these are all down from their debuts between 68 and 78%. So whoopsie daisy, it looked like another of these great financial innovations was actually basically just a kind of byproduct of interest rates. Yet another cargo cult thing we've seen in the economy.
The podcast that told you so has told you so once again.
Yeah. Where it appears that a bunch of people thought that they have, with some whiz-bang new thing, managed to sort of generally kind of outsmart the rest of the world, when it turns out they were just in the right place at the right time to be carried along by an unrelated rising tide that was lifting most boats.
Why, it's a rather simple scheme in a sort of trapezoid shape. In order for it to keep producing money for all of its investors, why, the only possible condition is a simple one, which is that money must remain free forever. Now, I don't see any problems with this here stratagem, do you, Colonel?
Well, why this fast talking? No, the fast talking. This
is very relaxed, bucolic Southern gentleman has a point.
Yeah. This is a Southern gentleman who's rolled into the studio with a bunch of just too good to be true business ideas. Has a point. Oh no, he's died. Hi again, Mike.
I'm Colonel J.G. Acaster.
No, so
and I say let's crack up.
This is why they lost the fucking Civil War.
New character. I am never going on holiday again. The lunatics have taken over the asylum. There's one more piece of sort of top matter I want to discuss before we get into the meat of the episode.
Yeah, I'm fully on board.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. I'm back.
Top matter, you say?
The first moon resort, everyone,
Let's
could be built in Dubai.
Are they building a moon?
Yeah, they finally built the moon. Earth has been too long without a moon. And Dubai has looked at this problem and said, what if
the moon was more like Dubai? What if Dubai was more like the moon? Fantastic. A great cultural interchange.
Yeah. Fantastic.
What if the moon had all the American fast food brands, but all the advertising was in Arabic?
What if that? What if there was a Five Guys in the Sea of Tranquility?
Sorry, I was not. I was just thinking about how much I'd like to go to a Five Guys in the Sea of Tranquility.
So the designs are in front of me. You don't really need to see it.
Picture the moon. Picture Dubai on the moon, and then picture.
No, other way around.
Okay,
other way around. It's picture Dubai, and then where the Burj Khalifa is, because I assume in this universe of this proposal they tear that down.
Planned obsolescence.
And then instead picture a moon that is about higher than any other skyscraper. It's a big moon.
Okay.
So this is from Dezeen. Designers Matthews and Henderson have created a concept for a 224-meter high spherical resort.
Oh, so it's a moon on Earth. It's not even the real moon.
No. They built a moon in Dubai.
Oh my god. Okay, even better.
And it's one of the least silly things in Dubai.
That is true.
Named Moon, the resort
imaginative
of a spherical steel structure enclosing a hotel and the moon surface attraction built on a circular podium. Henderson told Dezeen, quote, "There is nothing remotely similar to the moon anywhere on planet."
So we can't even make a joke about this. It's perfect. This was written by Chris Morris. This isn't a real article.
To which I might want to suggest, have you considered the Atacama Desert and just building the Atacama Desert in Dubai?
Yeah, the thing about Dubai famously is that it doesn't have enough desert.
No, not at all. It will be a fully integrated, contemporary, luxurious destination resort encompassing a unique signature attraction, enabling guests to walk along the lunar surface while exploring an authentic lunar colony. An authentic lunar colony, just like the real
It does speak to the sort of like narrowing of imaginations, right? That we've gone from, maybe we'll go to the moon, to maybe we can go to the moon in Dubai, which is just as good as the real moon, maybe.
Well, it's kind of like, Disney World versus Disneyland Paris, right? You've got the moon and then you've got the moon brackets Dubai. Yeah. Like, what if the moon was staffed by guys from Bangladesh who had their passport
think about it. There's a
away?
ton of like cultural franchises, right, that have like outposts in the UAE. Like the Louvre has a thing in Dubai. I think the Guggenheim has a thing in Dubai. Why should not the moon have a thing in Dubai?
Yeah, it's a franchise.
The moon doesn't have a thing in Dubai because it has no capital. It has no need for capital. Like if it did, then the moon would have been represented in Dubai quite some time ago. But I have a question about Dubai as somebody who doesn't know very much about it. Is it like Six Flags for rich dumb people?
Yeah, kind of. I was there quite recently, as like, just as like a stopover thing. It's changed a lot. So like part of the city, part of it is kind of like very like working class. Like there's lots of like sort of South Asian. there's like the South Asian working class, like they have like their shops and their communities around there. The stuff that like Dubai is now known for, because they turfed all the working class people out of those areas, is Six Flags for like rich influences. But it's also like, I don't know, it's kind of like having an insane experience on the internet, because it can't really decide like what it is. So you just end up sort of getting a mishmash of stuff, which is mostly just like American brands and content advertising. But, you know, you'll walk on a street and you'll find a bunch of American fast food chains, and then you'll suddenly like see a mosque, and then you'll also see like next to that mosque is like a giant like a rock climbing wall that no one can use because it's too hot in there. But for some reason, like it still exists. So you just like, it's just kind of this like random like they just take all the stuff that they think is cool and interesting and just like shove it in one place, and they don't really think about how it's gonna work.
I recommend playing the documentary Spec Ops: The Line if you want to understand Dubai.
What I see as Dubai as is if just doing cocaine normally isn't exciting enough for you, and you want to do cocaine in a place where like it's kind of fine, but if you get caught, you'll be killed, then Dubai is the place for you.
Also, if you want all your like NPCs in your game to like all have like, you know, British accents, but like Essex accents, then it's the place to go.
So
you ever been to the fucking moon, you cunt?
Yeah, it's also a great place to go if you want to go to the moon, but Virgin Galactic has unfortunately closed because it was funded in a stupid way.
They've put fucking cycle lanes on the moon.
So within the sphere, because remember, it's a gigantic sphere, bigger than sort of several skyscrapers. There would be a 20-story hotel inside the moon sphere.
Okay, so my crucial question about this is the bit where they said you can walk on the surface of the moon, but they also said the moon is
gravity's
spherical.
still real.
And I'm just... magnet boots? Is it going to have its own gravitational field? What's going to go on?
There's a large portion of inside the moon that simulates a lunar surface you can walk on. So there's two lunar surfaces, one that faces outside and one that's flat but inside. So really, you're walking around a sort of big dirty room.
Moon.
It says, it will have 10 acres of authentic undulating lunar surface, incorporating a highly detailed working lunar colony. Again, no such thing as an authentic lunar colony. It doesn't exist. Anything is an authentic lunar colony. It's not referring to anything. It's a sign without a signified.
Yeah, me and Jason have got this job over in Dubai, building a Sea of Tranquility.
So this specific area,
good job cashing in.
They said this specific area will be utilized for guest visits and also astronaut training, which is very ambitious.
Astronaut training.
It will also.
That isn't what you train astronauts for. They're like how to walk on some rocks. That isn't the difficult bit. It's all the other stuff. Like flying the spaceship and like the gravity and shit like that. All the stuff you can't do in a hotel in Dubai.
The colony, they said, will feature multiple global corporations and space agencies and a university campus requirement.
Why will it feature those?
I'll spoil that for you, Milo. It won't. They're just...
Well, Alice, I have a response to that, which is, they say, unlike many fantasy proposals featured on Dazine, said Henderson,
where are you getting this information from again? Okay.
Dazine. Unlike many fantasy proposals featured on Dazine, the moon will actually be built, as it's entirely logical from a built environment perspective, and the business plan is extremely compelling.
Entirely logical from a built environment perspective.
Yeah, people want a mixed use.
I just letting that one sink
moon,
in.
Just, you know?
I'm just cocking my head like a confused dog. Just like my head keeps tilting further and further to the side, like I'm trying to make sense of this, and eventually my neck's just going to snap completely off. Like every single thing you said was somehow dumber than the thing that came before, and I don't know what's going to happen. It feels the description of this feels like somebody is taking a meat mallet and going to work on my brain, like just squeezing every logical thought out of it for this thing to exist.
Wait, no, they're gonna build the moon, and a Russian oligarch is going to sadly decide to commit suicide by jumping off of top of moon in Dubai while handcuffed to own ankles in suitcase. Very sad. Yeah. Mental health. If only Prince Gary had spoken to him before this sad event.
What, just like a Russian version of Talk to Your Bloke? That's right. Yeah, perfect.
Поговорите с пацанами.
Particularly enjoyed the HG on Prince Gary there too.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. But look, I want to get to the meat.
Yeah, we got to get to joke
look,
one.
As fun as Moon is, and as much as I'm very excited to announce our new podcasting studio on Moon.
Yeah. Oh, wait, actually, no. Funniest possible thing about the moon is they accidentally build the moon too well, and it causes a huge tidal wave to subsume Dubai, and also sets the periods of women haywire all over the Middle East.
Third funniest thing that happened to the moon, someone 9/11's the moon. Because, like, there's a lot of things in this world you can 9/11, right? I'm not advocating that you 9/11 anything. However, some of them, like a built replica of the moon, that's an aesthetic, like, that's a thing to... Yeah,
it's 9/11able.
It's very 9/11able.
So, I have one more moon question just before we go. Like, guys, I'm not super familiar with astrology as a thing, but would astrology now have to account for the presence of the moon? So when people talk about like Mercury being in retrograde and shit, you've got like that now has to be a factor in your calculations. Like that's if you're wondering why you're feeling off as a Virgo, well, it could be moon too, exerting some influence there.
But this is the thing. This is the thing. Yeah, you know what it is? It's the long game, right? Nostradamus is going to start making perfect sense because all of his shit was accounting for Moon 2, which hadn't been built yet.
Yep.
Guy in Dubai getting divorced because every day for 3 months he turns to his wife at 6 p.m. and goes, full moon tonight.
Tell you what, it's going to be shit for Dubai werewolves.
I'm looking forward to when Dubai Dubai will do like a mental health campaign where they get rid of the moon and you've got to like look at the thing and be like, no moon.
In a big box. Yeah. Oh no. Okay, so look, children. This is leading to what I want to talk about fundamentally, right? Which is to look back in history and to think about
moons of history. What moons have there been?
Second moon. Well, until recently, just the one.
Of history.
But now maybe 2. We can finally pluralize that list. Look, it's been a one entry list for too long, and just like with so many things, Dubai has something to say about it. More Louvres, for example. But no, I wanted to talk about this because, as I said earlier, right, there is this this long-standing, I think, a mission on the part of the British and American. Although the British seem to be intensifying their quest to do this, while the Americans seem to be not pulling back necessarily, but also not intensifying as much, of their mission to essentially wind down Britain as a going concern.
Well, this is my theory, right? Is that we've seen a rapid gear change has taken place. The Office for Budget Responsibility has stopped publishing reports for the foreseeable future of like how the economy is going to do. Interest rates are way up. All of the sort of like interventions that the Truss Ministry has now instituted look more than anything else like a sort of a smash and grab, right? You try and do all of the Thatcherite stuff you want to do as quickly as possible, as hard as possible, because 6 months' time, there could be riots, Keir Starmer could be Prime Minister, and he's not going to roll anything back. So instead of doing the, like...
I welcome the new
instead of trying to do the, like, relatively softly approach of even Boris, what we're doing is, like, pedal to the metal. And my frame of reference for understanding this is the movie Heat. Now, the movie Heat, you may be aware, is about a crew of bank robbers, and it demonstrates a law about a crew of bank robbers, which is that every crew of bank robbers has to contain the crazy one. In Heat, that guy is called Waingro, right? Liz Truss is the Tory party's Waingro, right? Because much like the movie, at the drop of a hat, they are ready to rock and roll and to do all of the extractive shit as quickly as possible and as violently as possible.
At a certain point, you feel the heat coming. And when you feel the heat, you got to open a pork market.
That's so. So, to put this all into some context, right? That what's happened is, as Truss has come in during a unprecedented cost of living crisis, is essentially going to do things such as freezing energy bills by borrowing to subsidize the profits of the private equity companies that own the energy, the generators.
What could possibly go wrong with such a scheme? But how does she intend to repay this, pray tell?
Now, that's being worked out, but of course the scuttlebutt is that but will be taken off your bills in the future, so you've basically taken out a mortgage on your power bill.
Why?
But additionally,
that would make future bills more expensive, and there's no guarantee that energy prices will fall in the medium term.
Now, at the same time, though, we're looking at a sort of large package of tax cuts that are combined with spending cuts, such as recently announced, kicking 120,000 people more or less off of universal credit unless they can like magically create more high-paying jobs
Wayne
in
Grow
their
shit,
area.
you know? I'm not wrong. I'm not crazy.
Yeah. And you know, and this is all happening sort of in the context where, and this is from the FT, from a story from John Byrne Murdoch that came out a few days ago, where in Britain, where you look at the income deciles, right? Deciles of earners. So bottom 10% one decile, top 10% the other decile, right? What has essentially happened is that the lowest earning brackets of British households have a standard of living that is 20% lower than the same decile in Slovenia, for example. But this wasn't always the case. This is a product of the last 10 years. And that's not to say that people in other countries ought to have a less of a standard of living than people in other certain countries, right? It's not as though there's an order here and the British poor ought to be better off than the poor of other countries.
What the fuck are you saying?
But rather, that impoverishing these people has generally been, like in the global south, has been a choice made by wealthy people in the global north. And until recently, there was a kind of, and I will turn to Patrick on this one, social contract where we say, look, you're going to have an
you're going to get the
standard
treats.
of living.
You're going to get Netflix. You're going to get, whatever junk food you want. All of this.
And what's going to happen is that you're going to keep consenting to being a part of this system in whatever way consent happens. And a lot of the sort of more brutal extraction is going to take place elsewhere. But what we've seen in the last 10 or 11 years is that increasingly brutal extraction, whether it comes from increased rent seeking, whether it comes from slash and grab privatizations, as you talk about, Alice, right? It's taking place increasingly here.
Well, it seems, Riley, as though what you're describing is the violence of the imperial periphery. But surely we here in the imperial core are insulated from such unfortunate goings-on.
No. I want to sort of turn to Patrick, right, and be like, what do you make as a historian of this kind of dramatic, you might say, rupture of an implicit social contract?
I think that we have to, that the answer to this question lies in making contingent the social contract that we're familiar with, right? So that is very explicitly a product of the First and Second World Wars and mass mobilization military action, right? Where you have to put the entire nation in arms in order to meet some sort of perceived external national threat. And so you, as the elite of the country, are essentially purchasing buy-in from the masses by means of social programs, by means of not cracking down on unionizations, as was the case during World War I, right? So they're just like, okay, we don't care. We're not going to have any strikes. Do whatever you have to do to make the strikes not happen in order for production to continue. If you need to have the whole nation involved in some kind of war effort, you're going to need to purchase their consent by means of including them in the state project. And so this is, post Second World War, when you have two entire generations of people who have done military service on behalf of their country, you are rewarding their buy-in with social programs. This is the thesis. It's right. This is the Walter Scheidel and the Great Leveler. The idea being that one of the only things outside of disaster that reduces inequality is mass mobilization. And we're now, 70 years past that. We're not living in a world of mass national mobilization for any greater purpose anymore. We're living in a world where elites have kind of decided that they no longer need buy-in from the people, that is no longer going to be the source of legitimacy that they rely on in order to get people to support government.
And that's really, I think, the thing that I want to talk about as we zoom out and as we look in sort of comparator cases in history as well, right? Is this idea of legitimacy? Because the word is thrown around quite a bit, but I think that it's one of these things that we could do with a bit of a better definition of, a more precise understanding of it. And so, like, when we talk about what previous iterations of the Tory governments did, right? You mentioned this yourself, Alice, right? Like, the Liz Truss government, the Wayne Grow Liz Truss government.
With a big sort of skull mullet.
Is as sort of cast aside any sort of pretension of the previous two Tory administrations, which saw sort of the, you might say, events of 16 as a kind of rearing of
warning signal.
A warning sign, right? That things that we need to increase our legitimacy, our perceived right to rule among people who have been left behind. Mm-hmm. Now, and that resulted in Theresa May's burning injustices, which he obviously failed to remedy, and Boris's leveling up agenda, because again, like, they didn't really want to do it. They wanted to be seen to be doing it.
Yeah.
Because it was essentially a PR exercise.
And in relation to like being seen to do things, we can also talk about another great factor in legitimacy, which is sleaze, right? And the sort of like various scandals of successive Tory governments. And I can get to develop my second theory here, which is that every British political party can be theorized within the concept of two 2000s British youth TV programs. You're either a skins party or an in-betweeners party, right?
Okay,
And so like my problem with Liz Truss, not my only problem, but I think the biggest like sleaze problem with Liz Truss is that she and her cabinet are having too much fun. This was also Boris's problem, right? They're having fun, they're doing their own shit. It's it's depraved, sure, whatever, but we don't care about that.
Unnamed of them are having affairs or doing blow.
Yeah, exactly.
Having unlubed anal sex in their offices.
Yes.
They're all wearing neon hoodies for some reason.
Pretty much. I think genuinely you could fit the Truss cabinet into the opening of Skins and it would work. And that's one of the things that like it grinds on people a bit, right? Like you're not just immiserating me, but you're having fun doing it.
There's nothing the British public hate less than people who are having a good time.
That's true. Conversely, the in-betweeners sort of party is being miserable yourself, but also immiserating everyone else. Like Labour has almost always been an in-betweeners party. The SNP has almost always been an in-betweeners party. Weirdly, there was a brief period under Corbyn where Labour almost became a skins party, where people were almost having fun, but people hated it too much. So now we're back to the in-betweeners.
And I think this is I think where we talk about the idea of legitimacy as being seen to do or be something. Why sort of it was. Yeah. Why Boris lost so much of his legitimacy by being seen to not take the business of governing seriously.
You're French peasant, sort of like covered in shit, looking up at the palace and being like, I think the king is kind of getting more of a skins vibe.
But the thing is, right, I don't just want to talk about legitimacy here and now. I want to get back to it, right? I want to talk about ideas of legitimacy in history. So, Patrick, can you please explain the mandate of heaven?
Patrick, what is history?
Okay. Patrick,
steepling fingers.
Okay, so the mandate of heaven is great because it is the most, I think, coherent package and long-lasting package that you get in terms of like putting legitimacy forth as a thing, right? So the idea is that over the course of the very, very long history of China, that the mandate of heaven, the idea that the powers that be in the universe were granting the right to rule to a particular dynasty or a particular group of people, that this could be withdrawn if that dynasty or group of people was no longer doing the correct things, if they were no longer observing the proper forms, if they weren't honoring their ancestors, if they weren't ruling correctly, whatever the criteria happened to be at that particular point in time. And it varied at different points.
Start wearing fluorescent hoodies.
Calls himself the emperor. When's the last time he built a moon?
Sorry, please go ahead.
Yeah, when was the last time he supped from the correct ritual bronze? Like these are all the right kind of things. So the definition of what makes somebody legitimate is going to vary at different points in the history of China, depending on who the constituencies are, whose approval actually matters for you to be the governing dynasty, so on and so forth. But the key idea is that this is a coherent idea that people have and that it can be withdrawn if you no longer meet the correct criteria. The mandate of heaven can pass to a new dynasty, a new ruling group, and at that point, they become the legitimate rulers. Now, obviously, it's contested, like there's a lot of ins and outs and what have yous, but this is the key idea.
And so in this case, what happened is the mandate of heaven as an idea emerged in about 1050 BC, specifically to describe the manifest unfitness of the last Shang emperor, who was a bit of a drunkard and a lout and a layabout.
Skins empire, Skins dynasty.
Yeah.
And so essentially, right, the incoming dynasty claimed that the Zhou dynasty claimed that the Shang emperor was basically too cool. He's too cool to rule and for school.
Chinese Emperor Tony from Skin.
He was rude, crude, and full of tooth.
And you basically get an even better in-betweeners comparison given the sort of like ubiquity of examinations in the Chinese empires.
Yeah. And he kept calling Empress Michelle Knit.
That came later. Those came much later. But then what's interesting, right, is that this claim then turned on those who claimed it when the state of
they were called
then made
scholar
the same,
hat wankers.
then made essentially the same claim, right, saying, well, now we have the mandate of heaven because you have proven to be ineffectual and feckless. And I mean, what I think is interesting, right, is that there's a lot of assumptions I think people make that something like a representative democracy where people are informed by the media and so on is basically the best way to ensure that government works in the interests of the society.
You're Churchillian, worst form apart from all the others kind of shit.
But what we have here, right, is we have an example of an ideological package that is and was a quite effective way to maintain stability and effective government in a state that involved zero accountability to anyone who wasn't also a ruler.
Or an accountability, heaven ombudsman,
an accountability to the concept of the state itself. It is a counterweight to rule, but from other rulers for the purpose of this idea of the state that is in abstract.
Yeah, what made the Shang legitimate to rule is something we can actually see it in the oracle bone texts that we have, right? So these are inscribed pieces of bone that were used in divinations. And the idea is essentially you're trying to figure out when something is not going right or you're planning to do something, like which ancestral spirit or deity is mad at you and is making bad things happen. So you write the question on the...
Are you mad at me?
I feel like I'm getting subtweeted.
I feel like the trees are mad.
It could be. It is your great grandfather's great uncle who was broadly known for having 17 wives. This guy is mad, and because he's mad, there are foreign invaders. So
I'll be mad if I had 17 wives.
This is the kind of thing we're talking about here, right? So you take like an ox shoulder blade or the shell of a tortoise, and you put it in a fire, and you see how it cracks, and you read the cracks as an answer to your question. Then you write the answer. Then you write both the question and the answer to it on the bone, and you're like, okay, now we've got to do whatever we think needs to be done here. We're going to sacrifice. We're going to cut in half 15 war captives with an axe, and that'll do it. Now our great grandfather's great uncle,
being a war captive, and you're just like, oh man, I hope nothing bad's gonna happen to me. And the guy comes in holding the bone. He's like, bad news.
Can't believe all those war captives ran off and picked up a grenade from behind a curtain.
Yeah. Just a long fucking scroll that's like, you couldn't make it up.
Yeah. And I mean, the point is, this sounds... when we put it in those terms, we're like, that seems kind of weird, right? But this is the ruler's job, and this is the job of the state, is to mediate between all of the forces that make the world go round and make things happen in the world that have agency, and the state and the people who live in it, right? So if you're
it's about as transparent to me as interest rates are, to be honest. So I'm not that weirded out by this.
I just love the idea of a guy in ancient China, like, getting a thing, and they're like, okay, you're going to need to write down the account number. I can read it to you. You got something you can write that down? And I'm just going to, fuck. And then just picking up an ox shoulder blade and a kitchen knife. Like, okay, read it.
Yeah, but this is like, so this is what makes the state legitimate. This is what makes the ruling dynasty legitimate, is the fact that they can play this role, that they can mediate between all of these like powerful forces that inhabit the world and the world of the living. And when you fail to do that, that's when you lose your legitimacy, when you're not ruling correctly, when you're not paying attention to these external signs, when you're not making the sacrifices properly. Like, this all means that you're unfit to rule, that you're not doing your job, and you can be replaced by somebody else.
So when we talk about legitimacy as well, like, it's easy. It's an easy word to use, but I think it's a bit of a tricky one to define in the way that we're using it.
Steepling fingers.
I have a way I've been thinking about it in these terms. But Patrick, do you have any ideas?
To my mind, legitimacy is the trust that people have in the impersonal forces that govern their lives, right? So if you I think it's best illustrated by practical examples, but basically, like, you don't follow rules whether those are explicit or implicit, because you think about every single rule that you have to follow. You do it because you trust that those rules are in place for a reason, or that there's going to be a penalty associated with them. And legitimacy, in my mind, is the thing that makes you trust that. Right, that things are as they're supposed to be, and that I'm supposed to behave in these ways because this is how the world is supposed to work. And so it's just that kind of intangible quality of trust that you have in the forces that in the practical forces that govern your life.
And so essentially, when we think about like the end of the Shang dynasty, what we think about is a collapse of trust among people who matter, which were sort of fellow elites in China around the time. That the relationship between the Shang emperor and the state, such as it was one that could be trusted. We do not trust him to mediate between the spirit world and our world, the world of ancestors and our world. And so now, because that trust has been lost, a change must be made.
That's exactly right.
So I've got something a little different to my mind. I think it's similar, and I think it's compatible. Which is I think about it as both a performance of and a quality of a relationship. So it's the relationship of, say, me to the state, or a ruling paradigm to another ruling paradigm, or a person to another person, and it is our beliefs about that relationship. So my belief that my power over you is well and good, and my ability to make you do what I want to do is well and good, but your belief is basically the same thing, and we both have confidence that we both believe that.
And it's not like equally distributed ever. It doesn't like homogenize. Like you're more in the same way that you're more likely to obey a cop than a sign, right? It's the same difference. There are different stakes involved in what something's legitimacy is likely to be to you.
Well, that's also, I think, where the performance of it comes into play.
Sure.
It's that the performance of the relationship is, and especially how immediate it is to you. Where if the cop is right there telling you not to run the red light versus just the red light itself, but you still don't run the red light, not just because you think that a cop might be there, but fundamentally you kind of believe it's wrong to run red lights. And I think when we talk about,
this is where the Unabomber comes
in. when we think about things like why sort of successive Tory governments would announce a bunch of policies they had precisely zero interest in following through on, I think it's because there was a belief, right, that there was a belief that, much like in the late Shang dynasty, that they could not be trusted. To mediate
they were
between...
fucking with national insurance rates for the ancestors. Also, the thing about the Unabomber, right, is that he doesn't fit cleanly into the skins or the in-betweeners typology, and so I'm putting him in a third category, which I would call misfits.
He's kind of what's the guy from Parks and Rec called? Ron Swanson.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah.
No. What I want to talk about though, right, is this where fundamentally, right, they come in, they put forward these policies they have no intention of taking forward because they understand that there has been a widespread lack of trust in them, either to mediate between society and the economy, this thing that stands in for
the ancestor
spirits, or the other thing, right, the other possibility, and this is where we get into the next question of legitimacy, is who is the performance for? Who's watching? Who matters? Is it that they had to be seen by voters to be addressing these things, or they have to be seen by other people who matter to be addressing the imagined concerns of voters? And it seems like a kind of nitpicky distinction, but I think it's actually a quite important one because it comes down to the other big thing in questions of legitimacy, which is who matters, who decides whether you're legitimate. With the Shang, it was their fellow Chinese elites, right? But with something like the modern Tory party, or the question is it press barons? Is it other members? Is it other MPs and ministers in the Tory party?
Is it Dan Hodges?
Mm-hmm. Is it columnists?
Finance?
Was it like a jiu-jitsu situation where, like, you know, when enough of your bros like get the vibe that you sort of get a belt grade up, then you get it. And then there's not like really any system. It's more just like, yeah, you've been here for a while and you're a cool dude. So like, you know, you get a promotion.
Oh, the Andrew Tate of heaven.
So, Patrick, what's your view on this question of in a modern industrial democracy, this idea of who matters?
Yeah, so, I think that's what we're contesting right now, right? Is because the standard answer to that is, oh, you're accountable to the voters, right? Now, that's the answer that we're all supposed to believe. That's the thing we're all supposed to buy into. And that in itself is the basis of legitimacy of the modern state, right? The people who are in government are supposed to be working on behalf of the people, broadly defined. So now, obviously, we know that's not exactly the case, right? Unless the people in the United States, for example, are like rich red state car dealership owners. Like that is the people as far as a large segment of representatives are concerned. But we're supposed to believe in theory that they're working on our behalf. Now, there are arguments to be made that politics itself is a fight over who the people are and who matters and who gets to divide up the spoils, right? And now it seems like this administration has made the decision that their constituents are just this one very particular group of people, and everybody else can go fuck themselves, and that's fine. That's those people are not full participants in government or the benefits that membership in the body of citizenry provides.
And curiously, those people are the boards of governors of the state energy companies of other European countries, which is not necessarily the people you would have picked.
Because when you talk about when you sort of speak about you might say like ancient state-like entities, city-states, whatever. But mostly what you talk about is that the main power the state has. It's not just sort of the traditional thing you ascribe to the state, which is monopoly over the use of force, but rather the ability to command and direct labor, right? And these beliefs in legitimacy of rule are sort of crucial to the ability to command and direct labor, because that's what either makes the labor go do what you want it to do, or makes the guy with the whip send the labor to do what you want it to do.
Crazy idea. But what if the people doing the labor were the people? Just a thought.
Never work.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is a really key point, because the thing that we ascribe as kind of the most important characteristic of ancient states, whether this is explicit or not, is monumentality. It's just building really big shit, and you can't build really big shit without labor. And access to labor either means that you are going on massive slave raiding expeditions to pull labor in, and you're just going to make those people work to build whatever your thing is, or you have the legitimacy among the groups of people who matter to be able to make people do whatever the thing is, whether it's build your ziggurat or build your pyramid, or build your lovely palace in Mycenaean Greece, build your moon, I mean, these are all examples. They're like kind of downstream examples of why legitimacy is supposed to matter. And so in an ancient state, when you cease to build these things, that's generally agreed to be a sign that the state power that existed before, whatever form that takes, that legitimacy no longer exists. That there has been some sort of devolution of authority and legitimacy. And
you can, so if you want to look at in the ancient world, right? If you want to look at I have a few examples of different versions of sort of legitimacy collapses, right? One in a sort of civilizational state level, one at an individual level, and one at a ruling paradigm level, right? So if you want to look at the collapse in sort of a civilization or state, which sort of brings with it kind of de facto collapse in legitimacy, you just have to look at the world in the late Bronze Age, where the
I was going to say pre-Columbian collapse, but I enjoy talking about the Sea Peoples as well.
Those cursed Phoenicians.
I love the Sea Peoples. They're just showing up to add insult to injury, you know?
Incredible things are happening in China, written in cuneiform.
Yeah, so essentially, and again, Patrick can explain this better than I can, but you have this complex, interconnected series of societies that do quite a bit of trading with one another, quite a bit of command of labor, and then rather than just as I see, right, is a sort of being conquered by anyone else, really, is the states stop being able to manage the complexities of the world around them, whether that's changing climate, changing trade relationships with other states, or
change
indeed
the number of sea peoples.
Yeah, the number of sea peoples was zero. And
it's like my capacity to adapt to the changing metallurgical situation in the Mediterranean is largely hindered by the amount I'm currently being stabbed.
There's too many sea peoples. They're reproducing. They're coming over
What if
here.
they're Gallagher,
We're not
then?
equipped to deal with these sea people.
So let's like, so when we talk about like the Bronze Age system collapse, I mean, I know we don't know tons about it, but would you say like a lot of these sort of sets of rulers?
Would you say that we are in it? Would you say that it's happening again now to us?
So,
would you say that essentially this complex system got sort of overly complex and just couldn't be managed by these sort of local rulers?
Yeah. So the idea of the late Bronze Age and what sets it apart is that it is an interconnected world, right? It's that there are large amounts, especially of commodities, traveling back and forth across the Mediterranean. So the quintessential one, the one that matters the most, is metal. This is the Bronze Age. So to make bronze, you need copper and tin. Copper and tin isn't found everywhere, so you need to ship large amounts of it. So the quintessential kind of aspect of this is the Uluburun shipwreck found off the coast of Turkey, which has 10 tons of copper and 1 ton of tin, exactly what you would need to make 11 tons of bronze. 11 tons of bronze that's a shitload of bronze. You can do that's enough to make full sets of weapons and armor for like 300 dudes. And you imagine that this kind of traffic is happening all the time. When you're dealing with 10 tons of copper and a ton of tin, that you're dealing with bulk buyers, and and the people who are doing that, the centers of demand.
Ya Nasir, you motherfucker.
Yeah, the centers of demand are the palaces, right? They're these large state institutions that exist in Mycenaean Greece, they exist in the Hittite world, they exist in Babylonia, they exist in Syria, they exist in Egypt. Basically, the palaces, whether they're exercising direct control of trade or not, and this is kind of a debate that scholars of the late Bronze Age have, they represent centers of concentrated demand for huge amounts of commodities. And when the things start to fall apart in the late Bronze Age, when there are disruptions to these trade routes, when the commodities aren't flowing anymore, when the palaces don't have weapons with which to arm their guys, the whole system just completely falls apart. Right. So these palatial economies have existed for centuries. Like they've fallen down before. Like in Mycenaean Greece, the palaces get destroyed a whole bunch of times, but they keep rebuilding them right up until the point where they don't. And the reason for that is because the reason why you would build palaces no longer exists. The legitimacy of a system in which the palace represents a locus of authority for a particular ruling group, that's now gone. Right. And so the late Bronze Age, the collapse of the late Bronze Age is, first and foremost, I mean, people's lives got worse, and then there were fewer people afterward. Like lots of people seem to have died, like just at a basic level. But downstream of that is the fact that the kinds of ways of organizing political life that had existed for centuries just died in huge stretches of this world. So people no longer believed that the king sitting in the palace importing commodities from elsewhere was the right way to do shit.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the reasons why I like to have these comparative history discussions, because in the world we live in now, where it seems as though there is this globe bestriding sort of colossus of the neoliberal consensus,
and a gigantic pork market.
Yeah,
we all must engage.
We have outfitted in an 11-ton suit of armor. It's important to remember that these things can collapse, that they depend, that they are essentially domestic locuses of organization that interact with international pressures and also other domestic pressures
and as
well.
We've seen with Iran, not the only setup that is currently under increasing domestic pressures. It is a vulnerable time for a lot of methods of governance. And that if your method of governance is not able to manage those interacting complexities, then at some point it will just fall apart.
So I want to talk a little bit about Mycenaean Greece, because it's the best studied example of the late Bronze Age collapse, and trust me, it will be relevant, and I'll tell you why. So
look, if I didn't want to talk about Mycenaean Greece, I wouldn't have had you on the podcast. Okay. Please go ahead.
So one of the big theories going on about the Bronze Age collapse right now is that it's tied to climate change, right? It's that it gets colder and drier and crop yields fall, and
that's nothing like what's going on now.
Yeah, relax. It's getting hotter and wetter.
If you're an agrarian state and you depend on generating an agricultural surplus, well, obviously it doesn't take a genius to see how that can cause a legitimacy crisis on behalf of the ruling political system. but in Mycenaean Greece,
well, I don't see how changing climate could affect the underlying conditions which underpin the social order of our agrarian state here.
Sorry,
you sound like
Patrick, I really want you to go on. I want you to go on in a second. Milo, can you please explain this character to me?
He's a Mycenaean Kentucky colonel.
Well, I'm Colonel J.G. Acaster. I was present at every pivotal moment in history to ask seemingly rhetorical questions and then be shocked at the answers which I found.
More of a governmental psychopath.
No, thank you, Colonel J.G. Acaster. Patrick, please go on.
Why? Who would keep their own son in a maze and feed him 9 virgins from Athens?
Wait. But I thought you said he was present for all historical world events. Are you suggesting that the Minotaur was a guy who really existed?
Like King Minos was a historical figure.
Okay, Patrick, please go on. I'm sorry for the interruption.
This is wonderful. Okay, so when you track the climate record in the places where you have the best data, though, it turns out that the disruptions you see in the archaeological record, like burning the palaces and shit, like the things that you really associate with the end of this system, don't correlate with the most extreme climatic downturns, right? So where you have the best chronological resolution, there isn't a one-to-one correlation between, oh no, the political system's falling apart, and oh no, the climate's really bad. There are like these minor fluctuations, but the actual severe climatic episodes are on either side of the destruction. It's not like, oh, the climate gets worse and things go bad. What the reason this is relevant is it shows us that you can have a political system that weathers these seemingly huge shocks. Right? Like you can weather the actual Great Recession or the actual pandemic, but then maybe something small comes along and it comes along at exactly the wrong moment at exactly the wrong time when this other shit's going on. There's a crop failure and you happen to be at war with your neighbor and there's this group of pirates from Sicily who have shown up and all of this stuff happens simultaneously and it sets off kind of a chain reaction of events that lead to the end of a complex system. So like the really striking thing about the Bronze Age collapse, insofar as we can tell on the basis of the data that's available, is that the meat of it happens really quickly. It seems to happen over the course of at most about 30 years, and you can really pinpoint the most intense episodes of destruction to more like a 15 or a 20-year period. So whatever the kind of long-term stuff that's happening is, the most outstanding instances of the really bad shit happening seem to be compressed into a pretty short time frame.
It's because the sea peoples got really drunk and decided to have a wild 15 years.
So
well, it's because the sea peoples, like their victims were like, oh, is it the 5th year of it being 2016?
Now, the thing is, and this what you said here about systems that can weather these difficult events reminds me actually of an example as to why Canada seemed to suffer less political dislocation from the financial crisis than the U.S. did. And it's not to say that the politics of Canada are good. In fact, I have a whole other podcast about the politics of Canada are kind of fucked. But if you want to just look at system stability, right? And again, it had the unintended consequence of house prices kept going up forever and didn't have a break like everywhere else in the world in 2007. Because the Canadian system was built in, the Canadian housing insurance system was built in such a way that, unlike in the U.S., where it was semi-private, and then the mortgage insurers needed to be bailed out. So I said housing insurance means mortgage insurance. The mortgage insurer in Canada was fully publicly owned. It was a massive subsidy to essentially mortgage lenders, especially American mortgage lenders that came in. But what happened was the conditions for TARP, right, the conditions for the bailout were already built into the system. They didn't need to be created. And so what happened essentially is that the Canadian housing market, it had more political flex built into it. It was able to bear more strain. And so on the one hand, there was a more stable response to the financial crisis, but on the other hand, it then created a situation in which housing prices just never went down after 2007. They just kept going up, and that's why Canadian real estate has been in an unsustainable bubble since 2010. But I think that's just, to me, this is an example, right, of a set of institutions that is more able to weather a crisis than another one.
Why, eternally increasing house prices and therefore mortgage debts couldn't possibly be a problem. Well, as long as wages increased at a proportionately similar rate forever, which I presume is what the Canadian government has planned.
Is this what it was like when you first discovered Jerk Vanderklark?
No, that was a very different time. We're not talking about that right now.
I want to talk also. We talked there about like entire states or state-like entities just dropping out of existence with these colossal losses of legitimacy that aren't necessarily just connected one-to-one with, say, climactic events, but you can also look at individuals as having legitimacy, not just states. The example I have here is, of course, everyone say it with me, 1, 2, 3, Henry VI.
Atahualpa. Fuck!
Now, Henry VI, I think, is just one of the most perfect examples of an individual ruler losing the legitimacy of the people who mattered. And also being closer to us in history, we can know things like the names of the people who mattered, what their actual opinions are. We can speculate as to what...
How many Eton colleges they founded.
We can speculate.
I mean, you think after the 5th time they would have, like, you know, tried to go a different strategy.
Henry cracked King's strategy.
It was kind of a whole Marvel cinematic universe of Henry.
Phase 3 of the Tudors is launching in, like, 1513,
And the spin-offs, the Stuarts, it was a whole thing.
Will I understand the Stuarts if I hadn't seen the Tudors?
So you wouldn't understand anything about modern Britain if you hadn't done that. Trust me, I took the Life in the UK test. But like what we have is we have a ruler who is particularly ineffectual, and we know that everyone thought he was ineffectual. And so unlike, say, in like ancient Mycenae, where we have to sort of evaluate, okay, well, looking at the climatic data here and when the Megaron was burned, or whatever.
Or even like, you know, ancient Egypt, where you're looking at like list of kings, and you're like, okay, well, why is this one scratched out?
They really didn't like Akhenaten. I wonder why.
What's up with that guy?
But
instead, you have a bunch of like very flowery Elizabethans like calling him like a lack penis or whatever.
So, Patrick, can you talk to us about Henry VI, the lack penis king, and how he lost personal legitimacy?
Yeah, so to understand why Henry VI was such an ineffectual figure, you have to understand like just one basic thing about the nature of how like English government worked in the 15th century, which is that it was like a whole bunch of wheels spinning around the king, and the king didn't actually have to do very much. He just had to be seen to be making decisions
and to have a penis.
That was very helpful. Yes, that was an important thing. Like you had to fuck, and do so with some measure of efficacy. The king didn't have to like necessarily go out and lead armies in battle. The king didn't necessarily have to make good decisions. The king didn't have to like make policy or be an impressive figure. The king just had to be able to say, "I want this to happen. I'm the one who's saying that this is supposed to happen." That's it. The king has to make decisions. Don't have to be good decisions. Don't have to be the right decision. Nothing. Just make a decision. Henry VI could not make a decision. So the reason why this fucked everything up is because the whole legitimacy of the whole system, of all those spinning wheels, depended on the decisions that were filtered through those institutions, whether they were financial, military, down through the ranks of the nobility. They had to be seen coming from the king. And when they weren't seen as coming from the king, that made them not legitimate. That opened a discussion about who was wielding royal power, what their motives were, and everything devolved from there. When you throw in a little imperial failure,
one of the 500 warring barons period of British history. Yeah,
because if it's not the king who's actually wielding power in the most abstract sense possible, then that raises questions about who should be. Right. So that opens the door to people like the Duke of York and Margaret and the king's wife, whose name escapes me at this one particular moment, and one of the Eleanors, probably. And all of the other people who end up making placing themselves as contenders for the throne. It's just because Henry VI couldn't do shit, and it didn't matter whether the shit was good shit. You just had to do shit.
Mm-hmm. And in this case, right, what you see is the as you think of who matters, right? Okay, well, it's the like in ancient China, it's the fellow elites, but it's the fellow elites within the same state. It's not like the state kind of gets replaced with another one. But
sometimes we get to that later on. There's a reason why this Dutch guy is very popular in Northern Ireland,
right? But what we get is the idea of one person's manifest unfitness to rule, right? Undermines this idea that he ought to rule, because fundamentally you ask, well, whose consent matters? How is it given? How might it be taken away? You know, and in this case, right? You know, this. But being the lack penis king. Sorry, I'm really tickled by that particular imaginary.
Every Elizabethan insult is like this. It is like short of dick or something like that.
Right. Yeah, there is this, but there is this idea that if you, again, much like in China, if you cannot bring stability, if you cannot interact with, in this case, rather than like the forces of the global economy versus the forces of like the domestic economy, in this case,
if you can't bring a regular length penis to the table,
if you, well, sort of,
yeah, if you can't slap out a regular length penis on the like table in the Star Chamber,
it was the problem with the Elizabethan system of government. You know, it was the king had to basically answer all questions yes or no by doing a potato print of his penis in one box or the other. And if you didn't have a penis, it basically paralyzed the entire system.
Yeah, but
I mean, this survives in like sort of antique forms in various other like forms of governance. The papacy has the testicles thing still. You know?
So we laugh about this, but right at the same time that the Wars of the Roses were going on in England, there were a variety of civil wars going on in basically every major kingdom in Western Europe for a whole bunch of different reasons, some of which were connected and some of which weren't. But in Spain and in Castile in particular, the civil war / succession crisis that was going on was very explicitly about the king's dick and whether he was in fact the father of the woman or of the infant princess who was said to be his heir. And there was a whole bunch of stuff in there about how he was impotent. He had to fuck through a funnel in order to get the. This was literally the basis for why we know who Isabella of Castile is because her predecessor on the throne was said to have not fathered his heir because he had to fuck through a funnel. This is literally what happened. I'm not joking.
That's a fuck. What, his penis was too wide for the pussy?
No, the semen was not powerful enough to move on its own, so they had to guide it via a funnel to its final destination. This is the
And I mean, I think the reason to bring this up, right, is partly because it's Henry VI is a very funny character, as just a complete a lackwit oaf.
I wanted to talk about Atahualpa.
Yeah, but also additionally, right, that it's an example of someone who is a person, a form of government in the shape of a person who is unable, in the vise of other people who matter, to let's say mediate between them, to dispense the king's justice. But
yeah, and something that quickly becomes like obviously ridiculous and unsustainable. The second Hobbes' fucking Leviathan lumbers into the room, and one guy goes, "Wait a second, that guy has a funnel on the end of his dick." It just breaks down, doesn't work.
Leviathan.
Yeah. And but you also, we can talk about ruling paradigms as lacking legitimacy as well. So the example I have for this one is the opening of Japan in 1846, where we have the ruling paradigm of isolationist rule by a kind of feudal military dictatorship, the Bakufu, where essentially at this time we have only Dutch people are allowed into Japan. Yeah,
the horrible decision to look at every possible European and be like, these guys.
The world's first weebs, the Dutch. The first to be allowed into Japan.
Yeah. They wanted to get the full-length body pillows.
Hey, guys, I've got a body pillow. You jealous?
Yeah.
You ever been to a bar where women are pissing and shitting on the floor? Of course you haven't. You're not allowed into Japan.
Nothing these guys have to teach us can possibly destabilize our internal politics.
Anyway, time to let them proselytize. But right when this happened,
Tanagashima, what?
But I think this is because these things there aren't tidy lines between them, right? The changing of a dynasty is much like the changing of a state. But
and it can go back too. Like, what is the Meiji Restoration if not hold on a second, let's fucking reverse some of this shit. You know, it's not set in stone, and this stuff collapsing doesn't necessarily even mean it's gone forever.
What we talk about as well, the loss of an individual, a state, or a ruling paradigm, there's not a clean line between them. I've just chosen some examples that emphasize different elements. What happened, right, is that when they allowed the non-Dutch when the non-Dutch forced themselves in via the gunboat in 1846, you know, and the shogun realized, okay, well, we have to trade with these people so that we can continue our role as the feudal overlords and subdue all of the restless daimyos. But that ultimately, that created the conflict that led to the Meiji Restoration, because the daimyos were like, the shogun is no longer fulfilling his role as the expeller of the barbarians. He is letting the barbarians in, much the opposite of what we expect him to do, and what is actually literally implied by his name, by his title, shogun.
Yeah, just sort of like showing up at the shogunate with my long list of like barbarian status and some queries about the barbarian status. Number of barbarians. If you look at sheet number 3, number of barbarians quite high. Number of barbarians expected by the title shogun quite low.
Yeah, it's my wife. She's very bothered about the question of the barbarians. Why are the barbarians here? When will the barbarians be expelled?
Very much.
We've had quite enough of the shogun, no longer hot.
So, right, but what happens here, right, is it's not just a government change or a dynastic change. It's an entire...
Failing Tokugawa's bad government
It's an
palace.
He's saying, what's wrong with a few barbarians? Can't we have a few barbarians? Your name says no barbarians.
It's true.
He can't read his own name, folks. He can't read it. They won't let me say it. I'm going to say it. He's a no-gun.
God damn it.
Trump would have thrived in warring states Japan. He would have.
This guy
done
wants to
so
rule
well.
all of Japan. Why? To let in the Dutch? Why does he want to fuck the Dutch? This guy, he's named after a Mitsubishi. You're gonna trust a guy like that? This guy gets driven around by soccer moms.
I don't even know how to go back to this. But look,
No, sorry, named after a Mitsubishi has just fully destroyed me.
We'll wait for us to collect our composure again. We can edit out some of the Patrick laughing into his own hands. Rocking back and forth like a
Patrick
simple
has
dog.
got Oedipus Rex mode over there, clutching at his eyes.
Yeah. Oops. All right. He's trying. You know what it is? You're like Pentheus. You've come and looked upon the ritual that you had no business being near.
I'm just gonna pluck out my eyes at this point. No, that was really good. I can die happy.
Wait, when we talk about this with sort of I guess like Bakumatsu Trump now, he's just in my mind forever as a character.
Folks, this guy's wearing wooden shoes, and he expects us to take him seriously. Why are your shoes made out of wood, buddy? Get yourself some sneakers.
What's weird is that like Sengoku Trump is like a weird, like he's a traditionalist as well too.
He's he wants he wants to restore the maintain the power of the daimyos.
Restore the emperor, expel the foreign barbarians, preserve the samurai as a caste, but also no wooden shoes because he's a caste bitch.
Right.
Because
But what we ended up getting right after this battle was the loss of belief in the legitimacy of an entire paradigm. Not just a state, not just a person, but
you
a
can
whole
watch a documentary called The Last Samurai about it.
And I mean, if I was to wonder, right, where we are, I would say that there is, and where we have been for quite a long time, actually, not just since 2016 or not since recently, but since like the sort of mass waves of apathy that sort of have crashed over
since the first fish crawled out of the sea onto the island of Britain.
Yeah, and then just said, it's shit. It's supposed to be shit.
And if you don't like it, you can fuck off back into the sea.
But where we got that is I think what we're experiencing is a kind of a collapse of legitimacy of an entire set of paradigms. But before we go beyond that, of course, Patrick, I want to ask: do you have anything to add? Any insights or questions or comments about the Meiji Restoration as a kind of collapse of legitimacy of a whole system, not just a state or a person?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Meiji Restoration is the example that it ties to most closely in my mind is the French Revolution with the opposite outcome, right? So instead of you ending up with the total upheaval and like really rapid opening of horizons that you see with the French Revolution, what you end up with is a backwards looking, conservative, but still dramatically changed way of moving forward, right? So maybe, I don't know, maybe the restoration after of the monarchy after Napoleon's defeat is a good parallel for that, where like the world has quite obviously changed, but you're hearkening back to these extremely ancient forms in order to maintain at least the illusion of a connection to the past, in order to maintain some sense of kind of this ancient legitimacy. And that's like, I think that's one of the interesting things about legitimacy is like, that it's constantly being contested and constantly being formulated, right? So like you can, things that seem irrelevant can, when turned to the correct purposes, suddenly become a source of legitimacy. Like the Tea Party in the United States, 2009, 2010, like the Constitution was not a huge topic of conversation in American political life over the prior several decades. You know what I mean? And then all of the sudden, the Constitution this, the Constitution that, we're going to go back to the Constitution, this kind of like fundamentalist idea of political legitimacy on the basis of a bullshit interpretation of a founding document, like that became a really important way for these people to justify who they were and why they should be in charge. And now you hear it all the time. That has once again entered the mainstream of American political culture, and it's there.
Yeah, well, we can talk about post-Soviet nationalism,
absolutely,
as a like form of legitimacy for new breakaway states from the Soviet Union. People who who like thought of themselves as, you know, Kazakh or Ukrainian or whatever, as a sort of a, you know, a trivial cultural point almost, and then it becomes, you know, part of the ethos of your state in a way that it wasn't as a Soviet citizen.
Absolutely. Like legitimacy, like identity more generally, to your point, Alice, is contextual, right? It depends entirely on everything else that's happening around you, and what might seem incredibly salient at one moment, like let's say popular approval of government policies, or the idea of being seen representing some sort of popular will, that might not necessarily be the thing that actually matters if your core issue later on is, let's say, foreign, like the perception of being invaded by foreign barbarians. Right. So what matters at that point
once
is
again the big number of foreign barbarians scroll comes out.
Exactly. Like that's
written in Ukrainian this time.
Yeah. I mean, like take Zelensky as an example, right? Like what's the core issue there? It's repelling the Russians. That's the thing that makes them legitimate. It's not necessarily some sort of connection to the popular will. That's a regime in the middle of a war. Right. What makes you legitimate is that you're waging the war correctly. Like, so legitimacy, the bases of legitimacy can change, and sometimes they can change very rapidly in ways that you don't necessarily expect as you're trying to think ahead to the next 10, 15, 20 years of the political future.
So I have a question, which is, I think the thing that we're getting at with this episode, which is, where is legitimacy to be found in Britain? How would we characterize it? How might it be changing? Not least as we are nominally, but I think also to some extent structurally, with some obfuscation over it, still a hereditary monarchy that has just had a big fucking change in heredity, and which is going to change in popularity, I think, quite dramatically.
A hereditary monarchy, but becoming increasingly like the film Hereditary.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think one of my answers to that question really, I think, comes
They're
back to
gonna make a creepy 4-year-old girl the queen.
Finally,
They're gonna do it.
What I come back to, right, is something, Patrick, you said at the very beginning, not after the moon stuff, at the very beginning of this part, which is that the fundamentally that most people's assumptions about what makes a Western state legitimate is, are they protected from the vagaries of global capital in such a way that they can expect to enjoy a better standard of living than their parents, and so on and so on.
I have a theory about this, which is specifically focused on the treats, and I think that quietly one of the most desperate moments in British government legitimacy were the 2 weeks when they were worried that the food industry wouldn't be able to carbonate Coke anymore. Because the government fucking jumped on that faster than anything they have before
we
or
have
since.
Kept drinking that garbage.
But I think that's the thing that I think most people think. And if you I know it's Pat, right? But when you're talking about mass ideas of legitimacy, it is these obvious pat things that most people think. And I think really, you know, what has happened, where legitimacy has gone, is that after the financial crisis was kind of like our late Bronze Age collapse. The thing that the palace is supposed to do, or that most people expected of the palace sort of stopped doing. And it has sought legitimacy other ways since then, such by repelling the foreign barbarians from the European Union, for example.
Yeah, it has also like tried to cast away the need for legitimacy and just grab stuff on the way out, which is the Wayne grow mode of acquisition.
And but also there's legitimacy within that system as well, right? Where the legitimate leader of the opposition must seek permission rather than attempt to govern without the permission of the various elites, right?
I welcome the Sea Peoples, but I would encourage them to interfere with our trading arrangements in a responsible way, in a sustainable way, and in a way that allows us to come to a settlement which works for the people of this country.
Right, but so what happened is that collapse in legitimacy that sort of happened in 2007 that no one has addressed has created a kind of vacuum, but that is being still effectively defended by a regime that is essentially homeostatic, a ruling clique that has sort of slowly allowed that legitimacy to ebb away and replace it with coercion. That's where I see the story of legitimacy in Britain going. I don't know about you all.
Oh, good.
Yeah, if only we had some kind of kernel here to talk about how sustainable that was.
Well, surely an entirely coercive mode of politics relies on a well-supplied and armed, violent arm of the state and an entirely docile populace. A state of affairs which surely cannot continue forever, especially if the Conservative government remains intent on cutting the numbers of police officers they have access to.
I mean, so it's worth spending a minute thinking about coercive force, right? Because the whole reason why you invest time and effort in performing legitimacy is so that you don't constantly have to have recourse to coercive force, because coercive force is hard to maintain and it can very easily go wrong, right? Like, it's very easy. Like, let's say you send out this was something that you could have very easily seen happening in the United States during the George Floyd protests, right? It was like three riot cops get separated from the rest of them. One of them pulls out a gun and shoots somebody, and all of a sudden they're just beating police officers to death, right? Like, it's very easy when you're deploying coercive force to stop a populace from doing things, for that to go dramatically wrong very quickly. So smart governments don't want to have to do that all the time. So that's why you do surveillance, and that's why you grab people in the middle of the night. Because if you come to points where you have to face an armed mob, or face a mob, or face a riot, or face a protest, then it's very easy for that to get out of hand really fast. Like, it's easy to see that, to bring it all the way back to the Bronze Age. It's really easy to see that as being like how the Mycenaean palaces burned down. Like, the people came because they were
riot cops.
Yeah, the people were mad, and they came to the gates of the palace because they wanted to get at the grain stores that were inside, that it turned out that the palace didn't actually have. And so somebody throws a spear, and the next thing you know, the whole palace is burning, and you're like, well, don't need that fucking palace anymore. Like, and so that's so when these collapses in legitimacy seem to happen so quickly, I think it's because of sequences of events like that, where the legitimacy falls away, you end up in a violent confrontation, and the whole underpinnings of the system that people just trusted, where they're like, oh yeah, no, I can't drive 80 miles an hour in a 40 zone. They're like, well, who's going to stop me? I just shot the cop who would have stopped me from doing that.
And then the question, right, becomes, in a kind of palace economy, but a highly like financialized and globalized palace economy that's based on just-in-time supply chains, I think that that's what the question, right, is what loses legitimacy? Because in Mycenae or in Crete, you could say, okay, well, the palace has lost its legitimacy, but now with this, there is a sense of of distribution, atomization. There is these capabilities are networked and diffuse. The question is...
Well, I have one suggested answer, which is what happens when people get very angry with who rules them, but they can't really identify who they're angry at. Is you have like a jacquerie, essentially. People just burn a lot of stuff and hope that they get what they're looking for,
And this is the kind of thing, I suppose, that it's when you have a lot of people whose, let's say, life expectations have not been met and in fact have been revised downward very sharply, and you have a set of institutions that is resistant to doing anything about that because they're so focused on their sort of, Byzantine. I mean, we could have talked about the Byzantine Empire. I'm almost surprised we didn't.
Fuck. This is the problem when we have Patrick on, is I want to talk about all of history at once, which is not very convenient because it all happened at different times.
Colonel J.G. Acaster in Constantinople going, wow, this interconnecting system of court pleasantries and bureaucracy is so complex and unworkable, it's positively Byzantine.
Right, but that it's but that essentially, I think that this is the other point is that these systems that lose legitimacy, they become homeostatic rather than interact with the rest of the world in a way that performs that legitimacy, that reinforces that relationship of trust. They instead interact with the rest of the world in such a way as to not do that, essentially.
This is, I mean, everybody who talks about systems collapse as a thing is like, well, the more complex a system, the more pain points it has. Right. The more and to bring this back to the treats-based way of viewing, popular discontent.
The Economist Treats Index.
Yeah, the treats. We come back to the treats index. Yeah, I mean, that's actually a really good idea. If the supply of treats is vulnerable to disruption at a bajillion different points in complex supply chains, then that means that the system. The underpinning systems of that, which are political and not economic, are inherently vulnerable, right? So this was during, I feel like in the United States, especially, this was the reason why people were so worked up about gas prices, not because gas is a huge amount of your household expenditure, though it does matter. It's just important enough to matter, right? The reason why it matters is because everybody has to interact with the gas pump all the time. It is a constant thing, right? So, you've got to fill up your tank of gas once a week or once every 10 days or once every 2 weeks. So you're going to be constantly reminded of the fact that gas prices are going up and that you're spending X or Y or Z amount of money, even if in the grand context of your household expenditures, it's not that huge a deal. What matters is the fact that it's a thing that people share in common and that it's easy to blame political figures for it, even when they have effectively no control over what the gas prices.
The big Joe Biden, I did that statement.
Listen,
exactly.
Mac, I've been arming the Saudis as much as I can, but they won't take the gas price down.
That's so. In a world where the connections between what politicians can actually do and the economy is so amorphous in most people's minds, that makes the entire political system vulnerable to economic shock and disruption in a way that I think would have been hard for people to understand a couple hundred years ago.
And if you want to do the British equivalent of gas prices, it's of course house prices.
Yeah. And also petrol prices,
but also
electricity prices,
and of course,
and also gas brackets British version prices.
But also, we have gas prices, obviously, and energy prices in general. We've talked about a lot. In fact, the "Don't Pay" campaign can be seen as a kind of collapse in legitimacy of the idea that they should be able to charge what they can charge.
In terms of the treats economy, the British government's birthday boy rating is an all-time low. Yeah. The sailor suit of the British public is tattered, and the lollipop lies in shatters on the floor.
Unfortunately for the "Don't Pay" campaign, the problem with any jacquerie for that matter is, what happens to Guillaume Carl, what happens to the leader, right? And the answer is you have to have a bunch of knights decide that the rules of chivalry don't apply to you and therefore we torture you to death, kind of thing.
But what we can say in the UK, and again, I'm aware that we're sort of coming to time here, is interest rates. Because right now, you would make the same monthly payment on a sort of £350,000 house that you would have 2 years ago for a £600,000 house. That's the difference if you have a 30-year average rate mortgage. That is the amount that house prices have gone up. And this matters for renters as well, because as long as there are buy now...
And also a house that cost £350,000 5 years ago costs £700,000 now.
but then that matters for renters as well, because a buy-to-let landlord will be putting up rents by that much, which means other rents will go up by that much. And so what it essentially means is that, in the middle of a cost of living crisis, with state support being cut to the bone. At the same time, housing prices, already insane, are going to fucking skyrocket, along with energy prices once support ends. And so, when we talk about things like collapse, I mean, I think, when you talk about things like collapse, it can, at some point, it has to stop becoming quite as remote a possibility, even if that collapse is going to be not, say, directed at a palace or at a ruler, but will be sort of amorphous because so many things have become so, you might say, unlivable, and a lot of it can be traced back to a kind of homeostatic unwillingness or inability, or rather just not interest in, because they're interested in doing something else, adaptation to between a global economy and a domestic economy, basically.
Now, on the other hand, have you considered that it's going to be fine?
Oh, okay. I hadn't.
What if it was all fine?
So, any last thoughts, Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. The one counterpoint is that collapses. I think we treat collapse. Actually, this isn't a counterpoint at all. The collapse is a relatively common phenomenon. I think in the grand scheme of history, collapses of all kinds happen fairly regularly. Whole ways of life can just disappear in the course of weeks, months, years. Like the thing is, we're so used to thinking in terms of 2 years or 5 years or 10 years that it seems like a remote possibility when it's not. It's like, every individual generation's chance of experiencing a collapse may be relatively low. But if your unit of analysis is 5 generations, or you're probably going to get some kind of significant collapse in there.
The previous 5 rounds of Russian roulette,
scale.
The gun didn't go off. So I presume, extrapolating from the previous.
Yeah, it's like, because every way of doing things carries in it the seeds of its own destruction, right? Like no matter how intelligently or robustly you think you've set up a series of systems, like there are always going to be weaknesses that are baked into those. And if you run the simulation enough times with enough variables, eventually things are going to come up right. Like you're going to reach the point where you set off some sort of chain reaction of events that leads to some sort of collapse.
Uh-oh.
Personally, I would simply avoid that.
With all that in mind, hey, you know what? Britain decided in 2019, let's not avoid it. Let's run headlong into it.
To avoid it would be gay and also anti-Semitic somehow.
So I want to say, number one, Patrick, always a huge delight to talk to you on the show about various arcane topics in history. Thank you very much for coming on.
No, thank you so much for having me. It's the only place where we can talk, have the Kentucky kernel of history, a discussion about the Mycenaeans, and also, why Liz Truss is Waingro. This is the only context in which I can imagine that happening, and it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it was also my pleasure to join you all.
This is why it's so long, because this character talks so slowly.
A podcast with a Patreon funded by people who live in Britain must be an interesting business model in a time of skyrocketing costs of living.
Take that out.
Why?
So, look, I want to thank you all for listening, and also to, as Milo said, remind you that there is a Patreon, $5 a month. You can get a second episode every week.
Due to inflation, it's proportionately cheaper than ever.
Yeah, you can hear more of Colonel J.G. Acast.
That's right.
Just a sort of Forrest Gumping his way through millennia of history.
That is correct. Also, live shows.
There's a live show. When is it?
The 18th of October in London at Between the Bridges in Waterloo. There will be a Trashfuture live show.
Yes.
The ticket link is the Patreon and in the Discord. We will put it in the show notes of this episode. Also, if you want to see me, you can see me there, obviously. But also, 12th of October, London, the Pleasance Theatre. I'm doing my Edinburgh show, voicemail, one night only. 25th of October, ADC Theatre in Cambridge. Also the same thing, but in Cambridge this time. And January 25th, Brighton.
Oh,
Comedia.
that's a bit far out.
Look, do you want it? There's early bird tickets. You want to get those early bird tickets? There's only 30 of them. So if you want a cheap ticket.
Speaking of tickets, we don't say this enough, but at our live shows, if you are a $10 patron, not only do you get an extra Britanology and Q&As when we feel like doing them, you also get a discount.
When we feel like it.
You also get a discount. We should do one soon.
Guaranteed when we feel like it.
You also get a discounted live show ticket, so do check that out.
Yeah, it's
But
£5 off. There's a code on the Patreon.
Once you do all of that, of course, I also have to insist that you listen to Tides of History, the only podcast that I've listened to 100% of. So, Patrick, I go to the gym tomorrow. Please have a new one out.
I've actually have a lovely interview with an expert on the Mycenaean economy and its downfall.
Well, blow me down with a feather. I actually did not know that was coming, but hey, well, check that out after listening to this.
Set you up
Surely
perfectly
the
for
release
it.
schedule of the Tides of History cannot keep up with the gym schedule of a man who goes to the gym 5 days a week. It's simply unsustainable for a show requiring that level of research.
Thank you very much, Milo, for saying to the listeners that I do go to the gym 5 days a week. I want to add that it's for 90 minutes a day, and I've been doing it for about 8 months.
Longer than the average podcast.
So,
Why, I'm going to have to start listening to Comtown just to fill the gaps.
all right, check out Tides of History, subscribe to Patreon, go see Milo, come see us in Australia, you know what it is. And we'll see you on the bonus episode in a few days. You've heard of Australia. Bye, everyone.
Commit a crime in London and come see us in Australia. Bye-bye.
Thank you.